Great. So welcome everyone tonight to the webinar. We're going to be considering tonight a new resource from Creation Justice Ministries called The Canopy of Creation, Trees, Faith, and the Work of Justice. And tonight we are joined by Derek Weston. Derek, I was thinking, Derek, just before how long we've known each other. I think I've lost track of how long we've known each other. I think it's been at least 20 years, actually. But we're excited. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. So we're excited to have Derek Weston here with us tonight. Derek worked on this really fantastic resource and got it to being out amongst the world for all of us to use. Derek lives in Maryland and currently serves as the Director of Theological Education and Formation for Creation Justice Ministries. He's a writer, a filmmaker, a podcaster, a speaker, and an educator. And his current work is focused on the intersection of food and faith. He is the co-host of the Food and Faith podcast, and you can find that on podcast feeds and listen to those. They're very interesting. He's also the producer of another podcast called Spoon, Spade, and Soul, and that's a podcast that highlights food and land-based ministries in the Episcopal Church. Derek also is the producer of a short film series called A Wilderness Like Eden, which highlights the work of congregations that are engaged in the ministry of food justice. He's been a pastor and community organizer over the last 2 decades, and Derek's entire ministry and career has been as someone who's a deep believer in the potential of local communities and congregations to create change in their communities, and how that is something that will then produce opportunities for growth in new spaces. He received a bachelor's in film studies from the University of Pittsburgh and a Master of Divinity from San Francisco Theological Seminary. He also holds a certificate in health ministry from Wesleyan Theological Seminary and was part of the Regenerate Fellowship on Food, Faith, and Ecology through the Wake Forest Divinity School. So Derek's been around the theological world as well. And he is the co-author of a great book, if you don't have it, The Just Kitchen: Invitations to Sustainability, Cooking, and Connection and Celebration with Broadleaf Books, and has a forthcoming book that will be coming out soon from Fortress Press. And he's also written numerous articles for different publications. Derek's wife, Shannon, is a minister in the Presbyterian Church USA, and they together between them have 4 kids, so they're very busy and live just outside, as I said, of Baltimore. So, Derek, we want to welcome you to the webinar tonight, and we look forward to hearing about this resource and learning more about it. And we're so glad you're here. So welcome, Derek.
Thank you, Shannon. It's always awkward to sit by while someone reads your bio, but I appreciate you doing that. And I guess one thing that I need to add to my bio, which is maybe the most important thing for this context, is that I am an at-large member for the steering committee of Presbyterians for Earth Care. And so great to be with you all, and happy to share a little bit about this resource. So I am going to talk a little bit about the resource, but let me, just for those of you who may not know, give a little bit of background on Creation Justice Ministries. We are an organization that has been around for 40 plus years, going around 42 years. We started as the Eco Justice Working Group of the National Council of Churches. Then about 11 or 12 years ago, spun off and became our own organization. And we are very recently celebrating finally getting our own 501c3. So we are a grown-up nonprofit organization finally. So we work with 39 denominations, including the Presbyterian Church USA. And we create resources on theological education around creation, on advocacy work around creation. But our mission is to help churches think about the ways in which they live in better relationship with God's creation. Um, and how we bring that into worship, how we bring that into our outreach, how we bring that into activism. And so I will, at the end of this month, celebrate 3 years with Creation Justice Ministries. Grateful for the work that I get to do in the space, including creating resources like this. Um, Historically, the organization created an Earth Day resource that would come out a couple months before April and would be something that congregations would circulate around Earth Day. When I came on board, one of the things that I said was, I understand why we create an Earth Day resource, but also kind of want people to use it for the rest of the year. So we shifted our language from creating an Earth Day resource to creating an annual resource, in hopes that sure, we hope that you'll use it and use Earth Day as an opportunity, an excuse to circulate it. But also, there's some things that you can use throughout the year to talk a little bit about this particular issue. And the issue for this resource this year is trees. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here a little bit and walk you through some of the things that we're doing with this resource. All right. So the name of the resource is the Canopy of Creation: Trees, Faith, and the Work of Justice. Now, with all of the things that are going on in the world, why trees? Why would we make a why would we make a resource about trees right now? Um, there's a couple of reasons. One is because trees are sort of this universal symbol for ecological thinking and environmentalist thinking. You can think, I'm sure you can all think of five environmental organizations off the top of your head that use a tree or a leaf of a tree as their logo for their organization. So it's kind of this universal thing that draws us into thinking about creation. But what we don't tend to think about are the justice issues that surround trees and tree canopies. So that's one of the things that we wanted to talk about in this resource. Particularly in the United States, we wanted to talk about the correlation between redlining maps and tree canopy. That in spaces in our urban areas where redlining occurred, that what was also redlined, not just homes, not just businesses, not just transportation, but tree cover. And so when you look at the maps, the redlining maps, you look at the tree cover maps, they kind of overlap perfectly. And just generally speaking, lower income areas in our country have 26% less tree cover. And those areas are on average 6% degrees Fahrenheit warmer because of the lack of tree cover. And those numbers jump to 38% less tree cover and 13% or 13 degrees Fahrenheit warmer for communities of color. So as Shannon mentioned, I come from doing a lot of work around food justice. One of the terms that we use a lot in food justice advocacy spaces is the term food apartheid. The understanding that we have a human created system that keeps good food in some communities and access to good food is harder in other communities, and that not exclusively, but largely, the lines of those that access are racial lines, are divided among racial lines. Well, the same thing happens with trees. Um, we recognize that we have a human created system where tree canopy, tree cover is less in communities of color and low income communities. And in a lot of our suburbs and a lot of our wealthier urban communities, tree cover is plentiful and easily experienced. So Um, this is important for another just kind of very important reason as we look at these temperature differences. We don't talk about it enough, but during the summer months, the highest cause of death, the leading cause of death during the summer months is heat and heat related illnesses and heat related um, disasters. So when we start talking about tree canopy, we're now also talking about a public health issue. We're talking about issues of public safety. We know that in cooler urban areas, violence is lower. So we're talking about a lot of different justice issues for which trees are a stand-in for all of these various issues. And so talking about tree canopy right now is one of the ways that, particularly in a time when it feels like it's hard to make really significant inroads in federal policy, federal lawmaking, that being able to do something tangible around trees and tree planting just feels like a really tangible thing that we can be doing in a time where it often feels like there's not a whole lot that we can do. So that's why trees. Oops. Okay. You all know this, but I just wanted to share this graph that's in the resource very quickly in terms of thinking about the benefits of trees. Reducing stormwater runoff, providing wildlife habitat. Obviously, you can find thousands of species of insects on just one tree. Provides us with oxygen, increases property values, air quality, mitigating climate change, creating the foundation for new lives. And as we think of new life, as we think about the ways that leaves become the undergrowth for which we begin to see new life emerge, providing shade, buffering noise, reducing erosion, improving water quality, improving public health. And this is some of the benefits of trees. This is not an exhaustive list of the benefit of trees, but even for those things, trees are incredibly important and beneficial. My our executive director Avery often talks about trees as the best climate change fighting infrastructure that we have. So thinking about the ways that trees are beneficial, and when people don't have access to trees, they don't have access to all of these benefits. So in urban areas where you don't see tree cover, you do see stormwater runoff. You do see the public health crisis we're talking about. You do see the lower air quality. You see less other species of animals, and you see decreases in water quality. So, excuse me. So all of these things that are benefits of trees are also things that are lacking in the spaces that are lacking tree canopy. So the theological framing. This was the part of the resource that I get to spend the most time with, and I had a lot of fun writing this theological framing. For those of us who are people of faith, there's a couple of interesting things for us to think about. One is that with the exception of humans, trees are the element of creation that are mentioned most in the biblical text. And that in and of itself means that trees are playing an incredibly important role. Trees are, in a way, witness to all of the good and all of the evil that humanity does from the very beginning. We see that trees are engaged in the first provision that God provides for us. Trees are also involved in our first sin, not knowing our limitations with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so we begin to see trees. Trees are all over Scripture. They're everywhere. And I love this verse. This verse that I've probably read a million times. But then as I started working on this resource, it really stuck out to me in a new way. The first thing that this verse says, out of the ground the Lord God made to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. And it's so interesting to me that pleasant to sight is before good for food. That the aesthetic quality of trees is the first thing that Scripture mentions as a benefit to humanity. And when we deny people access to trees, we also deny them access to the beauty of trees. And for some reason, that just struck me in a new and interesting way that there's also sort of an inequality in access to beauty. When we think about all of the justice issues that we have in the world, that is one that we probably don't talk about enough. But we don't always have equal access to the beauty of creation. But again, trees show up as the main provision for human life, but they also show up as this boundary, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that we have limitations. And trees are the indicator that God made us to have limitations. And that's one thing that when we have so many in our world who talk about endless growth, endlessly bigger and more, that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil reminds us that God intentionally gives us limitations, and that sometimes we have to say enough or not that. So that's one part of the beauty of trees. The other piece of this is the way in which trees are talked about. So we have the tree of life and trees at the beginning, and for us as Christians, sort of the linchpin of the biblical narrative is the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And interestingly, Luke, the writer of Luke and Acts, had access to the language of the cross. But in Acts chapter 5 and Acts chapter 10, Luke says that Jesus was hung on a tree, uses the language of hanging him on a tree. So again, trees here are witnesses to the most heinous parts of human history. And that line of thinking brought us to thinking, to remember James Cone's fabulous book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree. To think about how in American history, trees were unwitting participants in one of the worst parts of American history. So we again see this piece where trees stand as witness and maybe as judge for the behavior of humanity in some really significant ways. But then we have trees at the beginning, we have trees sort of as the pivot point, and then we have trees at the end. That the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the street of the city. On either side of the tree is the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, producing its fruit each month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. And as we think about sort of our climate changed world, and how the leaves of trees can be for the healing of our world right now, how we need the leaves of trees to be part of our healing. This makes this less of a future eschatological reality and more of a present reality, that the leaves of trees can be for our healing right here, right now. So I had a lot of fun writing this part. There's a couple of stories that are highlighted in the resource. Those stories come from some of our member denominations and some of the folks who are active in our member denominations. And we were pretty intentional this year of highlighting some stories from our smaller denominations that oftentimes aren't represented quite as well. So in past resources, we've highlighted a lot of Presbyterian stories. We've highlighted a lot of Episcopal stories. We've highlighted a lot of Lutheran stories. But this particular story comes from the Church of the Nazarene, and the urban tree farming program that's happening there, engaging young people in urban tree um, growth projects, which I just find really compelling. You know, it's one of those ways when we often talk about how are we going to get young people involved in what's happening with the church and the life of the congregation. Man, tree planting is a really good way of doing that work, of inviting young people into what's happening with the church. So this project in Nashville is one that has done a great job of crossing barriers of race, crossing barriers of urban and suburban, and old and young, and getting people out into these urban areas to plant trees in places that have been deforested in the past. And then one of the other denominations or groups that is very very well represented in our work, but maybe not hasn't been very well represented in our resources in the past, are the Mennonite churches and the Anabaptist churches. And so the Mennonite men had a goal to plant 1 million trees in 10 years. And that's a project that is still going on. But as we continue to see this, that this is something that's very active, that there are Mennonite men's groups all across the country that are doing this work of planting trees in areas that need them. And so we just kind of wanted to highlight a couple of these really great stories of congregations getting out into their communities and helping to build events really around planting trees. It is a wonderful way of building community, a wonderful way of inviting, again, young, old, into the process of thinking about how we care for creation. One of the things that we also like to do in our resources is to provide advocacy and policy resources. Um, Let me just, let's be frank. This has been a really hard year to do policy and advocacy work, particularly for those of us who want to do policy and advocacy around caring for God's creation, because there are so many other things going on that are pulling on people's energy and pulling on people's time. And those things are worthwhile. Things like immigration and the erosion of our democracy and war, like all of those things are deserving of our time and deserving of our attention. But that has meant that we are, and actually just read an article about this the other day, not just here in the United States, but globally, we are talking about climate change less. We are having less conversations. And so thinking about the ways that we draw people into advocacy conversations, and where trees can be a part of that movement. So a couple of actions that we encourage for people is to understand your community's tree canopy. There's all sorts of digital tools like the American Forest Tree Equity Score. You can go to treeequityscore.org. That'll help you figure out like what is the tree cover in your community and where are more trees needed. There's great resources out there to begin digging in to think about, is my community one that has an equitable distribution of trees? And if not, what can be done about creating an equitable distribution of trees? Encourage your municipality to map your community's tree coverage and heat risk. Again, this is one of those things that, unless we're talking about it, people aren't thinking about it. Heat is a killer. Every summer, heat is a killer. And as every summer is hotter than the summer before, it's going to continue to be a killer. So, doing a map in your municipality of your tree coverage and heat risk, and encouraging the municipality to have these things mapped out, and again, maybe work with the faith community to see, is there something that we can do about tree coverage in our area. And lastly, although again, this resource, this list of actions isn't exhaustive by any means. But lastly, here, identify community players. One of the things that we continue to really talk about is the fact that, particularly in the environmental space, it's really good for churches to show up and walk alongside community partners who are already doing the work. That we don't have to start from scratch. We don't have to own the program, but we can show up and lend our voice, lend our credibility, lend our moral courage to the activities that are happening in communities that are surrounding us, to the work. And people are so often surprised to see the faith community show up, but they're also really glad when the faith community shows up. There is something that adds legitimacy and moral authority to having the church community show up. And even in this age where it feels like our influence as the church is waning, it means something to people to have people of faith show up in these spaces. And one of the things that we have in the resource is a letter, a template of a letter that you can send to your member of Congress. This is something, in terms of thinking about, is there funding to address some of the tree equity uh, concerns that are happening in the world? Um, this is a space like, Republicans love trees, Democrats love trees. There's a space here to potentially build some bipartisan work and cooperation. And again, in a time when working at the federal level kind of feels impossible some days, being able to put some energy into some things that might actually be able to get some bipartisan support, that might actually be able to get through the rancor, get through the noise, and have people say, "Yeah, I think we can support from either direction the idea of better tree canopy and more tree coverage." Maybe that's idealistic. Maybe that's hopeful. Maybe that's naive. But I've been called worse. One of the things that we're also just very intent upon when we create these resources is making sure that we have good worship resources for around these issues. Um, so one of the things that we always do is sermon starters. So we have a sermon starter for Ezekiel 47, um, and which again, this beautiful image of the temple vision of Ezekiel and trees being a part of that image that Ezekiel has. And Acts 10, once again, one of these references to Jesus being hung on a tree and thinking about what does that actually mean in the larger biblical history, the idea that people who are hung from trees are cursed. And so what does it mean for Jesus to assume the curse for us, and be a part of the healing? It's really important for us, for those who are familiar with CJM's work. we have put a lot of resources in the last couple of years that I have been a part of the organization into helping preachers preach more on creation justice issues because we now have research on this that the churches that are most dedicated and most steadfast in doing this work are the ones who hear about it from the pulpit. So we try to resource preachers wherever we can, in all the ways that we can, with our Eco Preacher cohort, with our Green Lectionary podcast, and with sermon starters in our annual resource. We also include some pretty basic elements of worship, a call to worship, a prayer of gratitude for trees, a prayer of confession. I believe there's also a prayer of lament. But again, just thinking about how can we, particularly those of us who have um, more liturgical orders of worship, how we can, in our order of worship, bring these issues into the life of our congregation. So these are just samples. These are ideas. They can be easily adapted, copied and pasted, and made to work in your context. We have no problem with that. But we want to make sure that there are good worship resources out there. And songs. We have a couple of hymns, a couple of songs, and then a couple of hymn suggestions of things that you can use for your worship as you're thinking about how to have more conversations about trees. We also have a children's resource, and a shout out to Jessica Maudlin from the PCUSA, who is every year one of the leading forces in creating our children's resource. And so she once again was a big part of making this year's children's resource. And I'm just always grateful that she's always one of the people who steps up and is willing to work on this piece. And she always does a great job. So we do have a children's resource. And finally, we end the resource with a discussion guide so that you can use this in a small group discussion. You can use it in an adult ed class. Um, just a lot of different ways that you can engage your community around this resource. And so, whether it's in worship, whether it's in advocacy and outreach, whether it's in your education and formation, we want to make sure that this can be a really practical resource for you to use in your congregational setting. So I'm going to stop there and would love to, just kind of love to open up for any questions you might have about the resource or, about trees, whatever.
So thank you so much, Derek. This has been fantastic. And for those of you who haven't yet had a chance to access this resource, you can go to the Creation Justice website and it's right there on their main page. And you can download it for free. You can also make a donation, which I encourage you to do to this incredible ministry that Derek is part of. And I'm also going to put in the chat a podcast episode I actually listened to recently, which is about the Black Heritage Trees Project around the United States and their work around witness trees, and also a link to Dr. Cohn's book. If you have not read it, this was the last full-length book that he published before he passed away a couple years ago, as one of our, most important and leading theologians of the last generation in this country, and that he chose to write about trees, right? And this last book is very significant. So thank you, Derek. And we'll just open it up for questions. You're making me think, Derek, of trees that have been important in my life and that I love. And I think many of us have that experience as well with trees, that they've been deeply special in our lives and we've had relationships with trees, right? So that's another important piece of trees and how we relate to God and to the holy. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll call on you and we'll do a little bit of Q&A here and see what folks want to talk about.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Derek, you mentioned in the beginning about the tree, how the distribution of
Hmm.
trees in urban areas falls along the lines of what are considered red line communities. And I was wondering if you could explain that a little bit, like
Yeah,
what
I mean,
it is and
um, yeah. So I am here. I am coming to you from just north of Baltimore, and in a lot of ways, it's believed that Baltimore is sort of the home of redlining.
Mhm.
That the lines that were driven or that were drawn on maps that kind of followed along transportation lines where we had intentional segregation of communities along racial lines. And one of the things that we find with redlining is not only are people segregated by race, but then you also see these social determinants of health showing up in significant ways. That in communities that are redlined, that school qualities go down, that food access goes down, that tree cover goes down, that health expectancies go down. And so, just thinking about in your city, it'd be interesting, I think, for everyone to kind of look at what is, it's an easy thing that you can Google about how was your city redlined, or was your city redlined, and how was it redlined, to segregate people but also segregate
Hmm.
resources.
And the other thing, Mindy, that's so interesting about this issue with, and heartbreaking about this issue with trees and redlining and racism in the United States is when I was working in Memphis, was one of our professors and was talking. Memphis is another heavily redlined city, and trees follow it like exactly the redlining in the city, and white communities versus communities of color. And when you take off from that airport, if you just look at the city when you're taking off or when you're landing, you will see it. You will see where there are portions of the city that have all sorts of tree canopy and portions of the city that are just completely denuded. There's no trees there. And when you get closer to the ground and you can see what kinds of homes and what kind of communities they are, you just see it. It's incredibly clear, but you don't necessarily notice it unless you're looking for it, right? Um, and this, of course, happens not just in the United States, but in other places as well. And so it's a really clear issue. I encourage all of you, whenever you're flying next time, if you're flying in and out of a city, take a look at that because you'll see it from the air, probably.
thank you. I've seen several questions come in on the chat,
Yeah.
Shannon.
Yeah, we had a question here about are there like scientific studies, Derek, that you could point to that indicate this issue around lack of trees and how it contributes to like local microclimates or weather swings?
Yeah, and I would point people to the American Forest Society. They have a lot of the research on their website.
Mm-hmm.
Um, easy to find, but it's the research has been pretty crystal clear, that we see the impacts of urban heat islands being created by lack of tree canopy. That that swing of temperature. The average is in communities of color is 13 degrees, but it can go up as high as 30, when you think about the difference between suburban areas that have rich tree canopy and urban areas where there is none. So yes, absolutely, there's plenty of scientific research, and I would again kind of point you to American Forests as a great place to find a repository of those studies.
Great. And George was asking the question. Hey, George, it's good to see you. You did our last webinar, which was amazing. Uh, Question about boards and commissions in cities. This is another good thing to think about in communities as well.
Yeah,
Boards.
yeah. I think it's one of those things where you can actually have an impact. When you're starting to work with the boards and commissions in cities, you can actually find people that will talk with you, actually find people who are invested in listening to you when you think about who's going to take up these issues. So absolutely, I think that's really important to note that.
I have a suggestion related to that.
Mm,
I live in Wake Forest and I served for 9 years on our urban forestry advisory board in our town. And the
mm,
way I found that was by contacting our public works department. That's one place that you
mm.
might be able to start, the public works or the planning department.
Mhm.
And I think people are so there. People are surprised to discover that their cities have foresters.
Mhm.
There's this thing going on in Pittsburgh, where I'm from, and where I'll be moving back to soon. That they're removing some trees in the Point State Park for the NFL draft, and the forester who's on staff of the city of Pittsburgh is kind of this lone voice out in the wilderness, trying to protect trees that are going to be lost because of making room for the NFL draft. So you might want to like not only find the foresters in your city, but maybe befriend them because they might need some friends right about now.
Yeah. And there's a bunch of other great resources that folks are popping into the chat. Carol was asking a question of describing the difference between an urban forester and a city arborist.
Actually, Mindy, you might know the answer to this question better than I
Yeah.
would.
They're both about the same thing. It's called, they usually have different titles in different cities and towns. They could be called the town urban forester or the city arborist. It just depends on, it's just a label basically.
That was my thought. I just
Yeah,
didn't want
yeah.
to say it when there's probably a more informed voice in the room.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and Matt's bringing up an interesting question around the history of the Navajo and the taking out of what they called peace trees or orchard trees back in the 1860s, and how to engage in some devotional resources that could help with some of that intergenerational harm. If you have some ideas around that, Derek.
Yeah, we do talk a little bit about this in another resource that we just did, um, and I'm blanking on the name. Give me a second; I will find it.
Mhm.
But we did a resource recently that we released recently, sort of about the ways that we um, engage with our indigenous communities, and part of the conversation was around these issues of tree cover. And I will very quickly
Yep,
do a search on our on my own website to find that piece of information that I should have at the top of my head.
that's okay. That's okay. There's some really great resources that folks have popped into the chat. So take a look through there and grab those resources before we finish up tonight. Um, Derek has put that in there.
Truth, Healing, and Repair is the name of the resource, and um, I would encourage you all to read that. I'd also, I think just to that question, and Matthew, thank you for asking the question. The reminder that there have been people who have been doing this work for generations and generations and generations and generations, and that so often we ignore the wisdom that has been there for a long time. And one of the spaces where we can come alongside instead of kind of steamrolling and saying, let's create our own program, is finding ways that we can support the um, tree restoration and protection efforts of the indigenous folks in our communities.
Hmm. Yeah, and thanks, Nelson, for that piece there. You just popped in about your local potentially soil and water conservation districts. They do often in this sort of springtime season that we're in lots of the United States offer tree seedlings or others. I know ours here where I live does, like, you can buy 5 or 10 trees in a pack for a very low cost, and they're all specific to our community and native on different kinds of trees. Some of them just shade trees, and some of them trees with fruit with food on them, or nut trees. So that's another good spot to check your sort of local extension, and another book resource in here as well. So thanks, Nelson, for raising that reminder for us.
Yeah, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, I would highly recommend. Both Nelson and Mark have mentioned that book. Um, just in terms of um, actually, Mark, reading it made me think a lot about it. It kind of felt like the same experience of chasing coral. That it feels a lot like one of those real time kind of heartbreaking stories of what it looks like when there is environmental degradation happening around us, and it's that kind of level of heartbreak when as I was reading it. Um, I also just dropped into the chat. We have a handful of uh, tree tree books um, on our website, and particularly would um, one of the others that I would highlight is "Discovering the Spiritual Wisdom of Trees" by Beth Norcross and Leah Rampey. Wonderful book, and would highly recommend that one.
I just want to say, don't panic if you don't get everything out of the chat. The chat is saved. And since there's been so much great information in the chat, when I send out the link to the recording, I can also share all those links with you from the chat. So I see people frantically writing things down, and I just wanted to tell you, don't panic. I'll share it all with you.
Yeah. And Carol's asking the question in the chat, Derek, about do you know of any resources around city public works departments to do stormwater improvement and minimize how that deals with issues of destruction around mature trees?
One resource that I would suggest. They may not have all of the answers, but this is another great thing that extension offices do. Extension offices think a lot about way stormwater runoff is affecting the environment, and thinking about the ways that trees can be protecting those sorts of activities. So, I would suggest checking in with your extension office,
Mhm.
seeing what kind of resources they might have.
Great. And yes, Nelson, thank you. That's such a great Robin Wall Kimmerer's newest book on
Mhm.
Serviceberry. Such a beautiful um, book and piece there. So my neighbor was just telling me, I didn't realize we have groves of serviceberries just in our neighborhood that I walk by and don't even notice. But my neighbor was telling me about them, and they are like the first berries that come out in the spring, right? That tree's job is to provide the early fruit for the early foragers in the early part of spring, and all the good sugars that they need. So we're gonna go get service berries, hopefully in about a month. So yeah, great. Well, any other final thoughts or questions as we begin to wrap up for tonight? Yeah, and planning native ones. Yeah, thank you.
One last piece I will say is that on our website, on the page that has the resource, the Canopy of Creation, there is also a very extensive tree planting guide,
Mm,
and it is thick, and it is incredibly helpful because I think one of the other pieces that we want to make sure as people are thinking about maybe doing tree planting activities with their churches
mhm.
is thinking about planting the right trees,
Yes.
and not planting the wrong trees, and also thinking about making sure that we're thinking about the maintenance of trees and setting ourselves up to have good maintenance of those trees after we do the planting. So, again, on the resource, there's a very robust tree planting guide that I would highly recommend if that is something that you think your church might want to engage in.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Derek. This is chock full of all sorts of good information. I hope some of this was new for everyone and gave you some really good food for thought to take back to your local communities, and also some things that draw us back deeper into the biblical story that we all live in. So I hope that tonight was good for all of you. And we're going to close with a word of prayer. Mindy's going to actually talk first about some of our upcoming webinars, and then we'll close out with some prayer at the end. So, Mindy, go ahead.
Yep, just real quickly to give you an idea of what we have coming up for some of our monthly webinar topics next month. We're going to be having someone come talk to us who is a disaster coordinator from the Presbyterian of Western North Carolina about hurricanes and the flooding of the 21st century. And being somebody who lives in North Carolina, I can tell you that this talk is needed. So we'll hear a little bit about hurricanes and how climate change is a factor, and how frequent and how intense they've become. And then in May, we have our the moderator of Presbyterians for Earth Care, the Reverend Courtney Wilcox, will be talking to us about planning for the season of creation. The season of creation actually is in September and October, but of course, we'd like to plan in advance. So she's going to be talking about some ideas and a framework for planning the season of creation in your church or other places that could make use of that information. And then in June, we have Dr. Paul Clements from, I think, Western Michigan. Is it University of Western Michigan or Western Michigan University? One of those two. And he is a well-known professor and has published studies on climate migration, and he will be talking to us about climate migration in June. And also just wanted to mention that we do all of our programs for everyone free of charge. If you choose to make a donation, you can go to our website. And I'll hand it back to Shannon.
Great. Thanks, Mindy. Those are really good webinars. And I've had a chance to meet the disaster coordinator for Presbyterian of Western North Carolina, and she's fantastic and has been doing and coordinating a lot of really good recovery there over the last year and a half. And so she's that's going to be a good one as well. So she's excellent, doing good ministry there. Derek, thank you for sharing with us tonight about this new resource. Thank you so much for gathering the team together that worked on it. And thank you for offering it to all of us tonight with some additional information and insights about it and how it can be useful in our communities. And thank you for your work also, Derek, with Creation Justice Ministries. And we offer to you our blessings for that tonight. So thank you, Derek, for your amazing ministry and work among us. So as we close tonight in prayer, I thought we'd just take a moment of quiet before I start praying for us to center ourselves in silence. But as you do that, I hope that you could sort of bring up in your mind a tree or trees that have been important to you for one reason or another, and to just imagine those trees if they're far from you or no longer near you, or to look out the window if it's nearby you, maybe even in the dark, knowing that it's out there in the yard at night. But just to think of those trees and to hold them in your sort of mind's eye and in your spirit as we begin prayer tonight, and to give thanks for them. Trees that were probably alive before we were born, or trees we planted. Mm. I hope those memories are blessings. Let us pray. Creator and creating God, as we consider tonight the witness of trees in our communities and in the biblical story, we pause to give you thanks for trees that fed us and feed us, that nourish us, that have given us spaces to play in, offered us shade, trees that hold ecosystems in place, and trees that are ecosystems all on their own, homes to so many pieces of your beautiful and bountiful creation. We give you thanks for trees that provide healing and cooling, and trees that provide the supply for building and for shelter. We thank you for baby trees and for ancient trees and for all the trees in between, trees whose names we know and trees whose names we do not know. We thank you for all of them. We also notice tonight the places where your justice towards the creation is not plentiful, where your creation has been harmed and maimed along with your people and the more than human creatures that we live among. This beautiful creation that has been treated with callousness and a lack of care. And most especially, we grieve tonight for trees that have been treated in this way as well, who have been taken down or not placed where they should belong. We ask, oh God, that you would knit us back into care of creation alongside the trees. And we give you thanks for trees who live beyond us, who have generational language that is far deeper than anything we can know as humans, that talk to each other, branch to branch, that make space for each other, that talk to each other underneath the ground, that speak your wisdom in a language we do not know, but you know, creating God. You've given us these trees as gifts. Help us to love all of your gifts. And we also pause tonight to remember some of the trees in your sacred words, the trees that bookend the beginning and the end of the Bible, the tree of creation and the tree of life in the holy city, the tree in the first garden you gave us, the first place where we ignored you, olive trees sprinkled throughout the Bible and still sacred in the Holy Lands today, cedar trees full of strength, pillars in communities, the fig trees that Jesus knew so well and talked to farmers and disciples about, where miracles took place in their shade that provided fruit for people to eat, trees of important moments, the ones that became an ark to carry Noah and his family so that your creation could continue and your new life could be replanted on the earth when your anger subsided. The promise of a safe place for each person to sit and rest in the shade of a tree, surrounded by fruit and sustenance. The resilience of trees that offered Job a place to be comforted when he was in his times of trial and despair. And the tree that became a cross for Jesus, who himself came from a family that worked with trees. We give you thanks for trees in our lives, those in our gardens, those in our yards, in our church yards, in our communities, trees that hold memories for us, places of playing and climbing and swinging, trees that give us food to eat. And so we ask tonight, oh God, that we will be your people and seek out places where violence happens around places in your beautiful and good creation, where trees have been destroyed, shade has been taken away intentionally, forests have been laid bare to the ground, and communities suffer and mourn for their trees. Help us to be rebuilders and protectors of communities, which means planting trees, so that all of creation could clap their hands and shout for joy. And tonight, finally, oh God, we give you thanks for Derek and his ministry at Creation Justice Ministries and for this resource. May it be a gift that we do not hold on to for ourselves, but share with others. May it be a springboard to greater faithfulness. And may the lessons and information we have gathered tonight be seeds and fruit we share with others. Continue to grow us strong and sturdy like trees to create ministries of justice and peace that will outlive us, generational shade, food, safety, and connection, a home for every place in your creation. We pray these things in your many names, O God. Amen.